must be cautious.
Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hi, this is Nick Anastasiou, story editor on Star Wars The Clone Wars and Star Wars Bad Batch. And you are listening to Aggressive Negotiations.
Welcome back, my friends, to the Star Wars podcast that explores all of the questions that you wanted to ask about Star Wars, but were afraid to. I am Jedi Master John Mills, and I am joined here on Aggressive Negotiations with my dear friend, my close personal compatriot, the sober yin to my raging yang, Jedi Master Matthew Rushing. Matt, are you ready for my own screwball topic to address on Aggressive Negotiations?
John, I love it. It's one of those things where every time we get together, there's many times where we have no idea what we're going to talk about because the other person hasn't told us and just surprises us. And it's always good weeks here on Aggressive Negotiations when that happens. It's like somebody spiked the Jawa juice.
That's right. And you know what? It would be giving us just as much joy as spiked Jawa juice if somebody went over and gave us a rating and star review over on Apple Podcasts or any other service that you decide to listen to us on. We love what we do, and we would love it if you gave us some recognition out there in the internet universe. And speaking of recognition, you can find us at the Jedi Masters on X Twitter, and you can find at Joy Nerd Party on X Twitter and the Nerd Party on Facebook and Instagram, which is of course where we are. But Matt, here's my quasi screwball question. It's not as much fun as the Jedi fashion show that you pitched last week, but we know that in the Phantom Menace, which just celebrated its 25th anniversary as we've recorded this, it's hard to imagine that much time has passed, or that we both just recently saw it in the movie theaters again. What a joy that was. Carrying that forward, we both know the way that the story goes. But good old Palpatine initially counsels the Queen not to go back to Naboo. So that is not his preferred move. Now, obviously, things work out a certain way, and then 10 years later, we have a giant civil war and all of those sorts of things. But what if Padmé had taken Palpatine's advice and she had stayed on Coruscant, quote unquote, where it's safe, and simply ceded Naboo to the Federation and said, okay, they have control of the planet. We will follow procedures. We'll go to the courts. We'll go all of those sorts of things. What does that look like? What is Palpatine's play? Because Palpatine's telling her to stay. Mm-hmm. He's been nominated by this point to become the Supreme Chancellor, but what precisely is the angle here? What happens if Padmé decides to stay on Coruscant? Because that means that the two Jedi, Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, aren't going back to Naboo either.
I think that's a really good question. And I think one of the things that it does feel like that it would do would be kind of to accelerate possibly the plans of Palpatine. One of the things that happens there is that, you hear Palpatine even say, that this move doesn't make sense for her. It seems too bold. It just doesn't fit the mold that he had put her in as a character. And so I think that, in all honesty, is really the first thing that ends up happening with his plan. Is it makes it gives him the ability to push that forward much more quickly. But I think what's also interesting about that, and a byproduct of it, is that I think it might also hurt Anakin's development in some ways, possibly. Because if Qui-Gon never dies, because they don't go to Naboo and then end up having to face down with Darth Maul, because he's not needed at that point, right? There's no need to reveal Darth Maul to anyone in that sense, other than the moment that we saw him on Tatooine, he could stay hidden possibly for a much longer period of time. But Anakin doesn't have the ability to impress, right? The way that he does. He doesn't have the ability to and honestly, I guess the big question becomes, would he even get to be trained at all? Because would the Jedi Council allow Obi-Wan to take the trials and then allow Qui-Gon to train Anakin? And does that mean that Qui-Gon just leaves and trains Anakin without the permission of the Jedi? I mean, that's a huge question, I think.
Well, I think you're on the two things there. One, Maul can quote unquote stay hidden, but they know now that there's somebody trained in the Jedi arts out there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the Jedi wind up going out and trying to find this person. Second is that's exactly where my brain goes, is that Qui-Gon says, fine, if you're not going to let me train Anakin, then I leave. And he leaves instead of Dooku being the one that leaves. Because Qui-Gon's death, as we accept the lore now, is what finally snaps Dooku to go off and be like, I'm done with this. This is enough, right? Now, of course, he's being poisoned. We've seen Tales of the Jedi and everything like that. Dooku's not exactly, prime material to be on the council to begin with. But I think that there is an interesting domino effect, because Qui-Gon leaving, I think, still spurs on chicanery, because certain things, Sifo Dyas and Dooku are already moving behind the scenes before Qui-Gon's death, sort of thing. If Qui-Gon leaves, that's, I think, akin to a death. Right? Like that's still removing Qui-Gon from the equation.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you're onto something. Would Palpatine have interest in Anakin if the Jedi had not exposed him as a potential recruit? There's a thing where Maul doesn't die. Anakin doesn't get the chance to shine at the Battle of Naboo. Qui-Gon leaves, most likely to take Anakin and say, we're going to go off on our own adventures or something like that, which I'm sure creates its own problems and rift within the Jedi Order. I mean, heck, for all we know, other Jedi leave with Qui-Gon and say, you know what, this is stupid. Why are we doing things this way anyway? But with Anakin removed from play and Maul alive, what does that even look like? We have some EU stuff where Maul, Shadow Hunter and stuff like that, where Maul is active in the background, but he can't be the face of diplomacy the same way that Dooku is. And they obviously still need the Civil War. So I'm curious. I think we both agree Qui-Gon goes off, takes Anakin. Maul is not a suitable face of whatever faction. So Palpatine becomes Chancellor. Great. What's his play after? Well, what do you think he does? Is he still, obviously the army is still being ordered, but what could possibly precipitate the Civil War? It's supposed to be the invasion of Naboo precipitates the Civil War. But if the Federation takes over, how? What happens? How does he bait the Jedi into giving him what he wants?
Well, okay, one question that I come up with then is it something that then delays his ability to create the Civil War? Because in some ways, the people haven't taken the bait, and so this movement that they have, right, is in the background of the senators. It's in the background of the people. It's in the background for everyone, where the Trade Federation has seemed to kind of overstep its bounds, and it's something that I think, once you get then to Attack of the Clones, it's the thing that actually I think pushes the Trade Federation too, because of their failure there to want to actually create this separatist alliance because they didn't get really truly what they wanted out of this. And I think it makes it more difficult for Palpatine to be able to convince them to work with him again. And I think it makes it more difficult for them to figure out why they would need to get a separatist alliance when they already got what that they wanted through the blockade of Naboo. And what does that lead to with the blockade of Naboo? Maybe does this accelerate the call for there to be a standing army sooner? Because that doesn't happen. Is that a possibility? Because the Trade Federation has defied the Republic, and so then the call for a standing army comes even maybe sooner.
Well, what if? The thing is, I see Palpatine able to leverage it to be spurring the Federation on to be well, we got away with this blockade, so they go off and they do something else, and they just start basically provoking stuff until eventually somebody does something, but by that point it's too late and you just got war on your hands.
Yeah.
Or Palpatine, basically his plan just becomes to leverage the Trade Federation being a bunch of rabble-rousers, and then eventually he just has them take over, and then he's behind it all anyway.
Right.
As it says, the famous line from Entrapment, "You're playing both sides." That's the beauty of Palpatine's plan is, oh no, stay here where it's safe, right? He can assassinate her. He can do what he needs to do. Naboo's under control. Things go crazy with the Federation. Cool. Palpatine wins, and he's the leader anyway. And then the Queen doesn't listen to him, goes off, confounds the Federation. Well, Anakin's in play now. All right, that's fine. And he becomes supreme ruler anyway. So, that's his real brilliance, obviously. But the Maul question is the one that I really get with, because after his defeat on Naboo, Maul becomes a bit of a Sisyphus character. No matter how many times he pushes that boulder up the hill, it keeps falling down on him. Maul is a linchpin here for me because I don't think Maul will ever be what Vader was able to be. Vader was still a disappointment to Palpatine. We've talked about that in the past, all of that stuff. But he was still at least able to walk into a conference room and have a discussion. As imposing as that armor is, Maul walking in, a horned dude with a bunch of body tattoos, that's, that plays even less well in a Death Star conference room. That's sort of like the wild card that I'm thinking of with Maul is, could Maul function as the separatist face and still get the sort of support that Dooku did as somebody that needs to appear in front of the public and try to persuade them that their cause is just?
I do think that it makes it much more difficult. I think you're right in assuming that the look and even just the character of Darth Maul, I think his temperament makes it much more difficult for people to want to trust him and to kind of do business with him. I think, the hard thing about Darth Maul is that he's built for aggressive negotiations. He's not necessarily built for, smooth and suave the way that Dooku was able to give heirs to, right? This person who is reasonable and wants to talk. And, the moment Darth Maul shows up, that for all intents and purposes, all hell's broken loose, right? Because the devil is here, and you're either going to do what he says or you're going to die. And I do think that is incredibly difficult to overcome, because that's kind of what he was meant to be, right, as a character. And that's he was the blunt instrument, it seemed. Yes, he had been trained to do things, by Palpatine. But it does seem as though the moment that Anakin came on the scene, there was never a choice for Palpatine of who he was going to go for, right? And so I think a very fascinating question does really become the storyline then of what happens with these characters, like what transpires to get these characters to these places then, because I do think that you really do end up with Palpatine, just being in a bit of a conundrum because that's the thing that's so interesting, because as I'm saying that, I'm thinking, well, Padmé surprises him, right? And so he actually has a plan. So I guess the question is, what is his plan?
It's simply become Supreme Chancellor. I'm just trying to figure out how he creates the crisis after that.
Right.
Because he needs a crisis in order to become, the emperor eventually. And Maul, the crisis that's perfect is a civil war. Because he gets to stay in office and extend his powers and all of that sort of thing, and everybody plays by his rules. And then he, all of a sudden he's like, hey, guess what? I'm emperor.
Right.
It really is that Maul factor that plays into everything, especially because if the Sith are supposed to function in such a way that obviously Vader is supposed to be ascendant, Maul is supposed to be ascendant. Maul's never going to be ready for that big. I think Clone Wars, Rebels, Maul's entire arc clearly shows that Maul is never going to be ready for the big show. He's never going to be the guy that's able to stand on that podium. Vader, as intimidating as he is, could at least have stood there and given a speech or, rallied troops or anything like that, or even gotten senators to listen to him. Maul,
Right.
That's not going to be the same sort of thing. I think that it boils down to the fact that I think by the time Phantom Menace comes around, Palpatine had won the minute that he's nominated as Chancellor. There's just no way around that, because he's just going to move the levers of power. It's just the way the levers of power move after that become so different, because Padmé, if anything, becomes easier to handle if she's on Coruscant. She becomes easier to assassinate because she's not going to have Anakin and Obi-Wan fretting over her.
Yep.
So,
well, she's not going to even have any Jedi protection, most likely at all. I mean, Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan probably will not be assigned to her anymore, and therefore, her being murdered in some way is going to be much more easy, because she would only have, Palpatine's security. And so I think that would be just incredibly interesting to see. And so I think you're right on target with the idea that Palpatine believes by Padmé staying that it is much easier for him to control the situation fully. He has nobody getting in his way. He has the ability then to create maybe a possibility of, I think, a civil war then with the Trade Federation making this move, taking over Naboo, which is also his home planet, to maybe possibly create the army of the Republic much sooner than we see possible here in the 10 years that it takes. And then, seeing the retaliation against that kind of aggressiveness on the other side, with somebody stoking the fires there on the Trade Federation side of getting others to say, oh no, we don't want the Republic stepping in this manner, and basically it's executive actions that are leading to this with Palpatine and all, and just taking advantage. And so I think you can clearly see the way in which Palpatine could make this work to his advantage. And because, in all honesty, he has to create some sort of war for the Jedi to be destroyed. I mean, he has to. That's the only way to get the Jedi out of the way.
Yes, it is the only way to get the Jedi out of the way. So he does need the war no matter what. I think that possibly a way to bait it and even get the Jedi on his side with the army would be to position it to have the genocide of the Gungans once the Federation comes in.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he says when they're getting ready for the battle, wipe them out, all of them. Maybe that was the plan all along. If you wipe out the Gungans, you create an atrocity so awful that the Jedi have to support my call for military.
Mm-hmm.
Because we could have prevented that terrible thing from happening if we'd had an army to send off to oppose you.
Right.
Maybe that's the very angle that he needs. And it's even, in many ways, even more monstrous than what he does, you know, by baiting the Jedi in to save 3 of their own on Geonosis.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's definitely the angle that he can play at that point.
Yeah.
You know, I was pitching this initially as sort of like a just an offhanded topic, but as with everything that is truly the things that we love with Star Wars, it's layered in such a way that it seems so straightforward what happens. But then when you pick at it for a second, you realize, wow, somebody spent a lot of time thinking through the chain reaction of events. And so this isn't straightforward. This seems straightforward because it's a logical progression, but they have to have entertained these different notions while they were developing the story. And it's such an interesting sort of road to go down.
Well, I think we, you know, in all honesty, we figured out too, and throughout this conversation, you know, what is Palpatine's favorite song? War. What is it good for? Destroying Jedi.
You know, I think that would have charted in a galaxy far, far away. That would have.
I mean, at least for him. I mean, he would have been playing that over and over and over again.
Yeah. Hey, why is it every time the Jedi leave your office, you play na 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 na? Hey, 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 goodbye. Oh, no reason. I just like the song. That's just why.
It's so catchy, right? It just,
you know,
it just does something for my mood.
It does. It does something for my mood, the same way that the Cantina Band song from the original Star Wars does for my mood, or Jabba's Baroque recital does for my mood as well. But, you know, if people want to enhance their moods by connecting with you online, Master Rushing, where can they find you?
Well, you can find me all over social media under the name Matt Rushing02. Here on the network, you can find me doing Owl Post with Dre Kaufman, as we had that completed show that talks about every single chapter of the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time. Over on the TFM network, you'll find me doing a bunch of shows. One's called The 602 Club, and we discuss all of the franchises we love. John's a frequent guest over there, so you can check that out, as well as a lot of Star Trek talk on The Orb, Warp 5, The Artificial Tango, Saddle Up, and sometimes on Literary Treks. And John, when people are trying to find that secret video of you doing your ballet to the Baroque recital from Jabba's Palace, where can people find you?
Well, just look up Kessel Junkie online, KESSELJUNKIE. And of course, you can find me here actually co-hosting a show on this network called House Lights, where we look at the work of directors. And every day I campaign harder and more fervently for a special look at the films of Uwe Boll. And if you know, you know. If you don't, then I think it's time to go back to the temple and figure out what our plan for starting a civil war with Sheev Palpatine would have been. So, Master Rushing, I think it is time to close these negotiations.
John, negotiations are closed.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.